welcome to today's episode of Labor Live at 12:05. I'm your host, Alex Jorgensen, the Communications Director here at the Alaska AFL-CIO. We have a very exciting program for you today. Obviously, the Alaska Legislature is weaning into its final days of session, so things are getting very chaotic. But I wanted to take time to discuss, I think, a really important issue, and that's payday loans. Payday loans. What is their impact on Alaskans, and what are lawmakers doing to kind of regulate those impacts? So without further ado, today's special guest, we are very excited to have him on the program, Senator Forrest Dunbar. So maybe, Senator Dunbar, if you could kind of maybe give our viewers a little bit of a better understanding of what are payday loans and maybe how those differ from maybe traditional loans that people are more familiar with.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me on. Payday loans are relatively small dollar, high interest loans that are generally short term and in theory are supposed to get you to your next payday. That's sort of why they're called payday loans. In practice, what we have seen, and there's been research done by the Alaska Public Interest Research Group, payday loans tend to be taken out in sequence, sort of one to pay off the other. And so the average person that takes out payday loans in Alaska takes out 5.5 per year. In the lower 48, it can be as many as 10. And they're often taken out one to pay off the other. And because of sort of the compounding nature of the fees and the interest, you end up with interest rates that are equal to 300 or even 400% APR over the course of a year. And the important thing about payday loans is they are exempt from the normal cap on annual percentage interest rate, APR, that is 36% in Alaska. So 36% is the APR cap in Alaska for almost every other kind of loan. And these payday loans have a special carve out. And what SB 39, the bill that I'm sponsoring, does, all it does is remove the carve out. That is, it starts treating these loans like every other loan in Alaska, or nearly every other loan in Alaska.
Right.
It prevents those 300 or 400% interest rates and drops it to 36%.
Wow, that is a lot to unpack. I mean, just kind of walking it back a little bit. So basically, these loans are kind of taken out to, let's say, someone needs to meet their rent. Their paycheck comes later in the week, but their rent is due today. So they take out a loan. But then as you said, what people are finding is they're taking out additional loans to pay off that first loan that they took out. So maybe people are kind of stuck in this cycle of loans that have, like you said, no cap. I mean, when you get your little, everyone probably is familiar with getting those packages in the mail, like apply for this credit card today with, it's 20% APR or whatever. Right. And maybe 36 is the cap, but I've never heard of a loan having over 100%, let alone a couple 100% interest.
Well, so the interesting thing is they don't advertise as if that is the rate. Of course, the rate is advertised as something else, but it's sort of the lived practical reality of what happens when people get trapped in these cycles that you're talking about. And so there was a lot of research done, again, by the Alaska Public Interest Research Group. They also did a debt jubilee where they helped a bunch of people pay off this debt. They did surveys. They sort of found out what the lived reality was for people caught in these cycles. And that was the effective interest rate that their data uncovered and has been in a number of other states. And I'll say a few things about the bill and sort of about payday lending in other parts of the country. So the federal government has, for a couple decades, had a protection that these payday lenders cannot offer these loans to service members or service members' families because the federal government has recognized that they are harmful and they don't want their military members to be subjected to them. And so, again, what our bill does is gives the protections to every Alaskan that service members already have. And we wouldn't be the first state to do this. 19 other states have already done this. They run across the ideological gamut. It's red states, blue states, South Dakota, Illinois, Nebraska. There are a number of states, Montana. There are a number of states that have done this. And crucially, the states that have done this impose that cap. None of them have repealed it. because the counter argument is, well, these folks that are in poverty or near poverty, if they don't have this tool, where will they turn? What else will they do? And the experience in other states that have passed this reform is that the sky doesn't fall, that there are alternatives. So you gave the example of rent. So there are rental assistance programs run by the state, run in Anchorage's case by the city, run by nonprofits. All of them are far less financially harmful than this program. I'm sorry, than payday loans. There are also a number of traditional banks and lending institutions that are starting up sort of financial products for this market. There's also a product called Chime that is new, that's online, that can help people bridge that gap, because we recognize there is that gap for some folks. But the survey data that ACPERG gathered indicates that people that take out these loans, they almost all, or a huge number of them, regret it and basically say, do not do this. If there's anything you can do to avoid it, do not do this. And so, again, the experience in other states is there are other products, financial products and nonprofits, that help fill that gap once you impose this cap.
Wow. So you've kind of mentioned what SB 39 does, and that's basically just, removing payday loans exemption that they have, that basically every other monetary loan in the state is subject to. What are the next steps for SB 39? And more importantly, how can our viewers at home help it get across the finish line?
Well, it has already passed the Senate by a strong bipartisan vote. It is currently in House Finance, which is its last committee of referral before the House floor. So I would say if folks want to promote this bill, we already had one hearing. If they could write the legislators on House Finance and say, this is an important reform, it improves the financial health of individuals in our state, please let it go to the floor. And then once we're to the floor, I'm confident that we have the votes to pass. Interesting fact about this bill, it was actually a Republican bill in the last session that passed the House 38-2. 38-2. Every Democrat voted for it, and the vast majority of Republicans voted for it because it was a Republican bill. It got to the Senate. It got there a little late, and it just sort of ran out of time. It wasn't opposed. It just ran out of time before session ends.
Right.
So this year, I picked it up because the person that had sponsored it last year didn't win re-election. The Republican didn't. And so I put it forward, and it'll be sort of an interesting test. There are a lot of Republicans in the state house that voted for it when it was a Republican bill. And it'll be funny to see whether they do or do not vote for it when it's a Democratic bill. It's an interesting sort of natural experiment when it comes to partisanship, because Democrats all voted for it. Democrats all voted for it when it was a Republican bill, and so they will almost certainly all vote for it again. But it'll be interesting to see how the Republicans feel about whether it's carried by a Democrat or a Republican.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see. Do you have any inclination of if it's, I know we're approaching, there's, the session ends next week, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like.
Right.
Is it part of, do you think it's going to make it across, or do you think this is going to be something that have to finish up next year?
I think that, again, if it gets to the floor, I think it'll pass. I think that the biggest challenge right now is just the clock, is just time in House Finance. And if it doesn't pass this year, I think it will pass next year. It's 2-year session. I'm hopeful if people, again, send House Finance, maybe they'll be willing to let it go forward and get to the floor, in which case I think it'll pass. But we are up against the clock. And so that there is some urgency there. One other point I wanted to make, it's gone through a number of committees and we've had a lot of public testimony. The group that is called in most often to support this bill has been pastors, has been religious leaders saying, in my congregation, I have seen the effect of these payday loans. Please give my congregation the protections that service members get. And that was not something we expected, and it is something that's really surprising. So,
yeah. Well, I just wanted to thank you, first off, for running, I think, this really important common sense piece of legislation to protect people from these very predatory practices that are, have the goal of maybe helping people make it by. I think obviously that's a very novel goal. People need to make their payments, but obviously the lived experience of these financial products is just pretty devastating. So thank you so much for all you do to support this legislation and all you do kind of writ large for working families in the state.
Can I add one more thing, Alex?
Oh, yeah, please do.
So another thing I think people will find surprising about payday lending in its modern context is, there was a time when I think there was opposition to these kind of bills from brick and mortar stores here in Alaska that might offer these products. We've gotten almost none of that. And the reason is because this market is now overwhelmingly online. That is, the companies offering these products are mostly online, out-of-state companies. And so almost all of the opposition we have gotten from this has been coming from out of state, from Utah, from California, from Washington, D.C. for the sort of national lobbying groups. Alaska is sort of a unique profit center for them because what's special about Alaska? Well, obviously we have folks with who work in the trades that make good salaries. Those folks mostly don't need payday lending, but some of them do. But the thing about Alaska is we've got the PFD, right? So these out-of-state online payday lenders have garnished more than $3.7 million from Alaskans' PFDs in the last several years. And so that, again, we most of the opposition to this bill has come from out of state, and most of the support has come from in-state. And I think that is also pretty telling.
Very interesting and very telling of, what is the best interest of Alaskans in this kind of broader debate. And clearly, probably not coming from people outside the state.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much for having me, Alex. Do you want to chat about anything else? There's all kinds of interesting stuff happening down here.
I mean, obviously, we're just excited not to be done. This is the work we live for. But, it's exciting to see what all crosses the finish line. I know there's kind of some unanswered questions with education funding, obviously, large priority. I know the pension bill is just now kind of coming over to the Senate, which is exciting. Obviously, I don't think we're expecting that to cross the finish line in the next week and a half, but been a long-term battle.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. We passed it last year, right? And the House passed it this year. Slightly different bills, but the general concept. And I think next year there will be a real opportunity to pass a defined benefit again. There are just very good reasons for it. We know it's extremely difficult now to recruit and retain public employees. Pensions are crucial to the health and well-being of our employees. Both of my parents received real pensions, and that was one of the important things that kept them in Alaska. I mean, they came up here in the early 80s and they stayed here and they kept working because they wanted to have that security, in their life. And I think that our police officers and firefighters and other public employees, teachers, deserve that kind of security. And I really appreciate that the AFL-CIO has been fighting for that, and there's a lot of data too that it isn't a significant cost driver if it's managed in the right way. We're not talking about a gold-plated pension. We're talking about something that's much more modest with important sort of cost controls for the state, but still superior to the current system that we have, that it's made it so difficult for our state and local governments to recruit and retain employees.
Absolutely. And I'm just so tempted. I can't not say this fact. But every time we talk about pensions, the number one thing that I hear from a lot of people that are maybe concerned about reinstating a pension system in Alaska is, well, it's just going to make us go bankrupt. Alaska can't afford to go bankrupt. And I think so many people failed to realize that last time Alaska had an actuary that blatantly lied to us, caused municipalities, every public employer, to basically, except for one, which I think was the Matsu Valley, to not contribute for almost 2 years to the pension system. And then all of a sudden, we had this huge unfunded liability because people didn't contribute. And they lied to us. And we obviously, that could be a whole other podcast episode here.
I'm sure it has been.
It all went down, settlement that, Alaskans got pennies on the dollar for that. But the last pension system obviously was different, included different things, and this one is a lot more financially stable, has those risk-sharing measures that I think is really important. But well, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I know you got a busy couple days ahead of you. So again, thanks so much, Senator Dunbar, for coming on the program. Again, folks, thank you. And thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of Alaska's working families.
You too. Thank you, Alex.
Perfect. Well, folks, that is it for today's episode of Labor Live at 12:05. Don't forget to tune in next week. It should be interesting. The legislative session is coming to a close. We'll have a little bit of a better picture of what legislation is going to cross the finish line, and more importantly, what legislation is the governor going to sign. So next week should be really interesting, and make sure to tune in. Again, this has been this week's